right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is so good to be here with you today. Oh gosh, are you feeling that Friday magic energy right now? I know I am. I am like so ready for the weekend right now. It is so good to be here with you today. This is really is one of the highlights of my week. And it's funny because when I first started doing this, I was so scared. But now it's like this community is so beautiful, so warm, so welcoming, and I am just thrilled to be a part of it. So thank you so much for being a part of the League of Gluten-Free Adventurers with me. All right, so let's see. Today is Friday, September 22nd, and let's see. And oh, who am I? I'm Miri Paisan. I am a gluten-free coach. And it is my joy and my pleasure to be the host of the League of Gluten-Free Adventurers, as well as these talks that we do every Friday. Let's see, I have been gluten-free for a decade at this point. Very early on, I made all of the mistakes and learned from all of them. And so now I am giving back to the community and sharing everything that I have learned with you. I remember what it was like early on being gluten-free. It felt impossible, and that of course was back in the ye olden days of being gluten-free, uphill both ways in the snow barefoot. Nothing was on the shelves, no restaurants, unless the owner of the restaurant happened to be gluten-free. But things are really starting to shift. It's becoming a lot easier to find gluten-free products on the shelves, online, in restaurants, because the education and the awareness has really been raised. But that doesn't make it like super easy all of a sudden. And so let's have a conversation about that, right? Um, so my topic for today that I wanted to talk to you about is, what is gluten? I mean, like, we all know we're supposed to avoid it, but like, what is it? And why is it such a pain in the butt to avoid? Okay. So getting into a little bit, just a teeny tiny little bit of chemistry. Gluten is a protein like meat or chicken, right? Only this is a meat or chicken or tofu. It's a protein that our body needs. Well, proteins our body needs. Obviously we don't need gluten, but it is a protein that our body uses to build cells and do all kinds of cool stuff. But it's actually a really long one that's made from two smaller proteins called glutenin and gliadin. And here's the really interesting thing is that when you're looking at a a seed of wheat or rye or barley, there's actually no gluten in them as they are, in their purest form. But there is glutenin and gliadin. And what happens is that when you crush everything and then get it wet, the glutenin and gliadin link together and form really long protein strands called gluten. So yeah, it's true that there isn't actually any gluten and stuff, but if it's covered in all of the insides in any way, shape, or form, as soon as you process it and get it wet in any way, which, even from our saliva, it can mix at that point, then you're going to be having gluten, right? So for all practical purposes, for our purposes, they contain gluten, even though they kind of really don't. But like, there's no way that we humans can use glutenin and gliadin without getting them wet and having them mixed together. So, but like, that's just kind of one of those things that it's like, oh my God, that's really cool. So I wasn't sure if you were aware of that, and I thought you should know, because this is something that affects us so deeply, right? So glutenin and gliadin, they get wet, they jumble together, and they create these really long protein strands called gluten. And they are really long, really strong. They are like linked together. And They're very, very stretchy, like rubber bands, like super stretchy. And here's why this matters. When you're baking at home, you need to be able to reproduce all three of those uh, chemical properties in your bakes to one degree or another. And like a lot, there aren't any other grains except for wheat, rye, and barley that have those particular properties. So here's what I mean by that. A friend of mine early on in my gluten-free adventure uh, decided to bake me some cookies. And so she went to the grocery store and she's like, okay, I can't do wheat, rye, or barley. I'll buy this other flour. And, this is back in the days before the one-to-one flours were on all the shelves. So she was like, she went to the health food store because that was the only place that was carrying stuff like this. And she found coconut flour. And she's like, no gluten in coconut flour. I'm good to go. And so without making any other alterations to her cookie recipe, she just did a one-to-one replacement with coconut flour instead of wheat flour. And they were terrible. The cookies came out, they were dry and hard, and I call them bricks, but it was like the worst experience. And she's like, I will never bake gluten-free again. And then after this, then she came and told me her experience, and I'm like, well, of course not, because coconut has a completely different chemical coconut has a different chemical property than wheat. And we call coconut as being thirsty because it absorbs all of the moisture. It just sucks it right out of the recipe, which is why the bake ends up being so hard and crumbly and unpleasant to eat. Like the coconut just sucks it all away, so it can't be part of the bake. Um, so it has a different chemical structure. There's no gluten to hold everything together, and it holds onto the moisture. So you end up with a brick. And it turns out that every grain is going to have a different set of properties, right? And we're very lucky these days because the one-to-one flours that are available on the shelves these days work to replace those properties, and they succeed to greater and lesser degrees. So early on, in order to replace the stretchiness, the kind of the elasticity, what food manufacturers were using was gums. So you've heard of xanthan gum or even guar gum, and so it's very stretchy, it's very gooey. It's not all that sticky, it's kind of slimy. Um, but the problem was that that didn't replace the strength. So you had to be very careful, and you couldn't knead and stretch and shape like bread dough the same way that you can with wheat flour, because it would just break apart. It wouldn't stick together. And that's also why you couldn't do the kneading, and like the second kneading that they usually call for in bread making, because that would like pop all the air bubbles, and then that was it. There wasn't anything to like build them back up stronger. And like that's what the kneading does when you're baking with wheat, is you're actually strengthening and getting those locked glutenin and gliadin molecules locked in and making them even stronger. And that does not happen when you use psyllium. No, when you use xanthan gum or guar gum, or pretty much any of the gums. So they're stretchy, but they're not strong. They break really, really easily. And the other problem is that gums, like a lot of people have digestive issues. And if you're dealing with a population that is already dealing with, in general, a lot of digestion issues, that's kind of problematic. So the next innovation that they used to kind of replace the wheat, the gluten, the stretchy, the strong, stretchy, sticky, was psyllium husk, which is like the main ingredient in things like Metamucil. And it's dietary fiber. So like, like people drink Metamucil to kind of make sure that their insides are running smoothly. Um, but in smaller degrees, you can put it in your bakes and it does uh, create it does still get that stretchiness going because it bloats up and it expands and it absorbs lots of water. Um, so it's the challenge with the psyllium husk is that it's difficult to find a consistent product. So one of the big things is that out there you can buy it in a powder form or you can buy it in the whole husk, which are teeny tiny. They're really small like that. But so you need to pay attention to the recipe that you're using or what you're doing. Are you supposed to use the whole husks? Are you supposed to grind it up? And then how fine are you supposed to grind it up? And then I'm not sure what's going on exactly, but I do know that one brand to another can make a big difference in terms of how effective and how much you need. And so because of that, you really have to pay attention to the hydration levels that you're using with that particular product. So while it works well, if you've got everything dialed in correctly, it can be hard for the home baker to use because you're still trying to figure things out, right? So what I'm seeing on like the cutting edge, like what people are using right now is a product called glucomannan. And it does not have gluten in it. It has it's called glucomannan. It is a byproduct of the konjac plant. So if you've seen anything like Miracle Noodles, which are like these plant-based, like vegetable-based noodles that you can buy, and they're usually squishy in the wet package or something, but that's konjac. That's so it's the same stuff. So glucomannan, it's within the konjac plant. But we're still very much in the exploratory phases with this. So but it's strong and stretchy, and it seems to be working really well. So, but because it's still fairly new and people are still getting used to it, there's not a lot of recipes out there that use it. So, in general, you want to use by weight if you have a recipe that calls for psyllium husk by weight, you want to use about 1/3 to 1/2 of the amount by weight. So if it calls for 10 grams, you're going to use like maybe 5 grams, something like that, right? Or 30 grams of psyllium, 10 to 15 grams of glucomannan. So I'm going to give you a link so that you can grab glucomannan if you want to start playing around with that and trying that out. So that's going to go down into the comments. So be sure to check that out. And let's see. So that is kind of what gluten is and how to replace it. And if you have questions, please do drop them in the comments. I would love to chat with you about this. And in the meantime, I'm going to go into my Q&A section. So let's see. So Michelle wrote to me and asked, what is the easy way to go gluten-free? And oh my gosh, Michelle, that is what all of us are basically trying to figure out. What is easiest for each of us? So it's a great question. And it's also a challenging question because what do you mean by easy? Are you someone who cooks? Are you somebody who hates to cook? Because easy is going to be very, very different for each of those people. And like, I'm a basic cooker. I don't do epicurious. I'm more like, I don't know, like the less ingredients, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And the less dishes, the better for me. But, some people, they want to use like every dish in the house. My ex-husband, we had an arrangement when we first got together that was, He would cook and I would do the dishes. And I thought it was fabulous until I figured out that when he cooks, he uses every dish in the house in order to make dinner. And I was like, man, I'm not sure about this. you know, but that's just the way it is. Like he and I had very different approaches to cooking. I'm like basic, keep it simple. I don't have a lot of time. And he wanted to do like a 5-course meal, you know? So easy for the two of us meant very different things. It- Having said all of that, in general, to go gluten free, the easy way, you're going to stick to unprocessed foods, unprocessed fruits, veggies, and proteins. You can have plain unflavored grains, so you're going to buy the rice and flavor it yourself as opposed to buying Uncle Ben's. You want to keep the processing to as limited as possible before it enters your house, right? So unflavored grains, rice, corn, quinoa, sorghum, use salt and pepper and lemon for flavor. You will be gluten-free with that. Okay. So that's the easy way to shop for gluten-free. Hands down. And if you're on your own, it is such a great place to start. You just kind of go cold turkey, and then you can add things in as you start figuring them out. And for me, this was a really good starting place. But as a foodie, it was miserable because I wanted to taste everything. I didn't want to feel limited by or restricted, and that's why I developed the system that I use and that I teach to my coaching clients, so that there are other options, because like there's a myriad of options that you can do just with fruits, veggies, proteins and grains, salt, pepper, and lemon. Like you can do a lot with that, but it's not the entire gamut of all the food that's out there, and you can really start to miss baked goods. So the easiest way is to bring a coach on board with you and have somebody who's already been down that road, and then you can ask questions and you can find something that works well for you, so that and then you're just kind of bypassing all of the banging your head against the wall until you figure things out phase, and every step of the way you have somebody saying, oh, here are all the pitfalls, let's avoid it and go this way instead. So there's people like me and other gluten-free coaches that can help you develop a personalized system so that you can quickly get back to eating your favorite foods without feeling left out. Okay. So I'm looking. I don't see any more questions right now, and that's great. I hope that means that I've answered everything for you today, and I hope you have a fabulous Friday. May your weekend be glorious, and I will see you next week. And next week, so Monday, I have a big announcement coming out. I'm going to be sending it out to my email list first, and then I will also be posting it here in the League of Gluten-Free Adventurers. But don't worry, I will be talking about it all next week. So keep your eyes peeled. I am so excited for this. All right. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me a DM or, drop a comment here, and I will be happy to talk about it with you. Have a fabulous weekend, everybody. Take care.